Here beginneth the lesson. Thank you for joining us for Monsignor Scott Rassbach, Bishop-elect Scott Rassbach's Gnosticism of Philip K. Dick. Bishop-elect Rassbach has a degree in English from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, where he worked on a thesis on Philip K. Dick and his works. He also holds a license of sacred theology from St. Raphael's, where he has delved into many topics in modern Gnosticism. He's an avid student of magical and mystical orders, modern ways of understanding ancient ideas, and the intersection of the traditional and the current. And he's also a lumberjack.
And a farmer. Don't forget farmer.
And a farmer, yes. So with that, over to you, Monsignor.
Well, thank you. I've been very intrigued and entertained and educated by the talks that have come earlier today, and I've learned a lot, and I hope I've incorporated a little bit of those into this talk. But I'll tell you that this talk is not those talks. This is going to be a little bit on the different side because the topic is a little bit on the different side. We're going to be talking a little bit about Philip K. Dick and his view of Gnosticism, which was very interesting and very complex. First, I want to mention a little bit about myself. Like His Eminence said, I have a degree in English from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and I did a thesis on Philip K. Dick that was never finished. For 25 years, I've been thinking about this topic, so I have a little bit of insight into Philip K. Dick. At the same time, it's a very slippery topic, and it's very hard for me to talk about. And the person who did that thesis, who worked on that thesis back in 1996, is not me. I was ordained in 2007, but the person who was ordained is not me. I was married in 2017, but that person is only partly me. The me who is giving this presentation is not the me who joined the church, and it's not the me who worked on the thesis, it's not the me who got married. So did any of that happen to the me that you're seeing right here sitting and talking to you? And in fact, are you even seeing me, or are you only seeing an image of me? Am I a real person, or am I a simulacrum? These are the kinds of questions that Philip K. Dick explores all the time in his works. So let's talk about Philip Kindred Dick for a little bit. He was born on December 16th, 1928 in Chicago. He was 6 weeks premature. He was a twin. He died on March 2nd, 1982, which is a nice inversion of his birth year, 82, 28. He died in Santa Ana, California. He was 54 years old. He was raised in Washington, D.C. and Berkeley from a pair of divorced parents. His mother had custody. His twin, Charlotte Dick, died on January 26, 1929, just a few 6 weeks after their birth. And this had a profound impact on Philip because throughout his life, he often referenced the idea of his twin and her influence, continued influence on his life and his thoughts. He went to Berkeley High School, and one of his contemporaries was Ursula K. Le Guin, who was known very well to people from Oregon. And he was very influenced during his youth and during his college age years by the Beat Poets, because he was going to school right around that time in the 50s. He went to University of California, Berkeley for 2 months and then dropped out. During that time, he called himself a cosmic panentheist. The universe is an extension of God. One critic of his work, someone who's analyzed his work, calls him a fictionalizing philosopher. And I think that when you get into his themes, you start to see this very, very deeply. So the themes I want to talk about, especially the things that recur over and over and over in his works, of which there are many. I want to say that he wrote 44 novels throughout his life and 121 short stories that deal with these various themes. He talks a lot about personal identity. Who we are is not who we think we are. And sometimes who we are is not in any relationship to who we think we are. Often in his stories, the world we live in is an illusion that crumbles the closer you look at it. It's not only an illusion, it's a poor illusion that falls apart when you start to really examine it. He writes a lot about vast political conspiracies because he grew up in the time of the Soviets and the Nazis, and he writes about overwhelming police forces. He writes about the Nazis in The Man in the High Castle. He writes about underground movements, an awful lot. Very often in his stories, he has an unreliable narrator. So the person telling the story is either incorrect or misled or is lying. There cannot be, in his stories, one single objective reality. When he starts to interact with reality, he very often ends up in a very subjective zone where everything is fluid and it changes depending on who he's talking to. He talks about alternate universes. The Man in the High Castle has at least 3 alternate universes that the characters encounter through the course of the story. He talks about simulacra, the things with an appearance of being human or being alive. Do Androids Dream Electric Sheep is one of his big stories about the simulacra. I forget what they're called, the replicants. That's okay. One of the most amazing things about his science fiction, though, is that he talks about common people. He's very often talking about the people that you would encounter every day. He talks about drug users and workmen and police, people that you encounter very, very commonly, as opposed to the elites or these heroes. Ursula K. Le Guin actually said about him that his stories have no heroes, but they have the heroics of common people. He writes about Jung. He loves Jung. He loves archetypes, the collective unconsciousness, this idea of a group projection or a group hallucination, and the idea of synchronicity, where things happen in pairs or triplets or various connectedness between things and events. He talks about what constitutes an authentic human being. And this has a great tie-in with Gnosticism, because Gnosticism has the idea of the anthropos, or the perfect form of the human, or Adam Kadmon from the Kabbalah, or from Hermes Trismegistus, or any of these sorts of ideas of an authentic human person. He writes about mental illness, schizophrenia, paranoia. He writes about drug use. He writes about theodicy, the problem of evil, and how we overcome that in our world. And to tie into Tim's talk, he writes about time. Now, Tim mentioned that time sometimes is cyclical and that we come to see it as linear, but Philip K. Dick talks about time as orthogonal. It's at right angles to the time in which we're living in. So there's a sort of time that moves at a right angle to our forward motion. He bases this off the ideas of a fellow by the name of Dr. Nikolai Kozrev, who's a Soviet scientist who got jailed for his strange theories. He also talks about retroflow. He has an entire story about the Big Bang being a mistake and an explosion, and that time is moving forward because of the explosion when the actual natural movement of time is backwards. And he has a whole bunch of little stories and thoughts about how that would work and how that affects him. So just in his fiction, he has a ton of these themes, and you can always find them there. Some of his notable works, things that you've probably heard of. Do Androids Dream Electric Sheep, which would be the movie Blade Runner. It talks about the replicants and the simulacra. The Man in the High Castle, which won the Hugo Award for Best Novel in 1962, and is a story of alternate realities where the Nazis and the Japanese won World War II, and yet there's another reality where they didn't win it that's different than the one that the reader is in. And then there's another one that comes up that's different than either of those. A Scanner Darkly is another of his books where he talks about drug use and the the effects of it and the reasons that people might be involved in it. There's a book called The Second Variety, in which a bunch of self-replicating robots that were built to assassinate the Soviets become intelligent and decide to work against both sides. And that was the basis of a movie called Screamers. And the one that's probably most important to people who are interested in Gnosticism is the Valis trilogy. He has an event, Philip K. Dick has an event happen to him in March of 1974 that kind of causes this event. And I'm going to talk more about that trilogy in a little bit. So first of all, let's talk about this Gnostic experience he had. In March of 1974, Philip K. Dick had a toothache, and it was terrible. I don't know if you guys have ever had a toothache, but I've had one, and it is the worst pain I think I've ever felt. It is distracting and all-encompassing, and it makes you really, really focus on the fact that you are in pain. And so he called in for a prescription from a pharmacy, and the pharmacy in that day and age would deliver codeine to you. So he goes out to get his delivery, and the delivery girl is wearing a fish necklace, you know, one of those ones that the Christians wear that has the nice stylized fish on it and the little cross in it. And as he's looking at her, he sees this fish necklace, and a pink beam of light hits his eyes. And from that moment on, he has this series of mystical experiences that reveal to him a lot of information about the nature of reality. And he sees an overlay of Palestine at the time of Jesus overlaid over Santa Ana, California. And that's where that phrase, "the empire never ended," comes in. He wrestled with this experience for the rest of his life. I mean, he thought about it constantly. And we know that he thought about it constantly because the way he thought about it is that he wrote it down. And he wrote it down in such a way that he covered 9,000 pages. And he wrote it down in this book, The Exegesis of Philip K. Dick. This is quite a doorstop as well, and it is only a portion of the exegesis. It is a very heavily edited portion. And one of the things that I love about this book, which I have not read all of, and I wish I could, but I have a hard time getting through it because it is so dense and so deep, but you can definitely see a person who is completely unprepared wrestling with their Gnostic experience. And I'm going to read you a short excerpt of it on page 371, where Philip K. Dick actually explores the idea that he might be going crazy. He says, schizophrenia with religious and paranoid coloring of the ecstatic type, a sense of the cosmic, vast mystical forces with me in the center, like a titanic psychedelic drug trip. I was probably secreting mescaline-like autotoxic substance not well understood. If I had any romance or adventure in my life in those days, 1974, and in the 70s, Nancy's leaving had broken, i.e. at the time of my 70 mescaline trip, it was more likely my first entry into total psychosis. My ego disintegrated then and again in 374. And now I exhaust myself trying to explain 374. I was lithium toxic and had a schizophrenic breakdown. So a lot of the scholars who research Dick say that because he is trying to explore whether or not he's going crazy, he's not. Because crazy people don't do that. They don't try to understand what's happening to them. They simply sort of accept it because it's part of the mental illness portion of it. And that's what the critics say. I'm not sure about that. I'm not a psychologist. So this exegesis is his conversation, Philip's conversation with himself about this series of experiences. And he really would have benefited from the spiritual direction that Reverend Rick was talking about, because he goes around and around in circles. He goes over and over and over again in the pages that I've read, in the 8,000 pages, which is part of the reason why they edited it down. He continually covers ground that he's covered before. Some of it is in correspondence, some of it's in notes, some of it is just musings, some of it is plotting out future novels. He talks about philosophy, he talks about conspiracy, he speculates about the nature of reality. He meanders, he gets high and he writes. He talks about religious scholarship, he talks about the sacred, he talks about rants, he talks about other authors, he talks about religious figures of his day. And he goes on and on and on. But from this work, we get some of the interesting terms in Gnosticism that we use when we talk about Gnosticism in the modern day. He was in a culture like we are that has the benefit of pulling from multiple places and multiple times. So he was interested in various forms of spirituality. He was well read on Christian and Hindu and Buddhist and Scientology and all sorts of different kinds of spirituality, New Age thought, Hegel's philosophy, ancient Greek philosophy. He knew a little bit about all of these subjects. And most of that is because he read encyclopedias. When he had a question about something, he would read the entry in the Encyclopedia Britannica, or he'd read the entry in the Oxford Dictionary of Religion or the Oxford Dictionary of Philosophy. And so he would get these really concise snippets of these very deep topics. And occasionally he would go out and read deeper on those topics. He often turned to the Bible and a lot of Bible studies and could quote great passages out of the Bible when they would fit in with whatever he happened to be talking about at that time. So some of the terms that have really entered into modern Gnosticism especially are the black iron prison. He goes on about the black iron prison at length in the exegesis. And he talks about it as a vast, complex life form which protects itself by inducing a negative hallucination of it. So you cannot see that you are in the black iron prison. It is an illusion that is self-perpetuating and that is adaptable. So that as you start to see you're in the black iron prison, it adapts so that your realization becomes the new version of the black iron prison. It is a self-perpetuating criminal virus that controls by hiding itself and putting us in a half sleep. We alter the prison by perceiving it. And as our views shift, it shifts. In a sense, it is not there at all. It is a nothingness that contains us. And it is isolating. If you can see the black iron prison, there's no way to talk about it. There's no way, there's no semantic signs to depict it. And since language is how we share a worldview, having a way to describe the black iron prison is crucial. And we don't, and we can't because it adapts itself. We are not aware of our participation in the dysfunction of the black iron prison. We think that we perceive the black iron prison and we're fighting against it, or we're resisting it, or we're trying to see what is really there, when in reality, our own perception of the black iron prison is in itself a perpetuation of the black iron prison. And even when we see it, it warps us into micro extensions of itself and it propagates. So when I try to tell you that we are in the black iron prison, that very act of telling creates the black iron prison for you and keeps you trapped and enmeshed in it, whether it's through your reaction against the idea, whether it's your adoption of the idea. Doesn't matter which one you do, you're in it. And this sinister life form takes power over us, reducing us to slaves, And then it causes us to forget our former state, to be unable to see or think straight, and to not know that we can't see or think straight. And finally, it becomes invisible to as big a reason of what it becomes invisible to us by reason of what it has done to us. We cannot even monitor our own deformity, our own impairment, because of what it's doing. And that former was a quote by Philip K. Dick himself. So the only way to get out of the prison, according to him, in later explorations of this idea, is to begin to heal it. So you don't get out of it by getting out of it. You don't get out of it by acknowledging it. You begin to heal it. And he quotes the Gospel of Philip by saying, so long as the root of wickedness is hidden, it is strong. But when it is recognized, it is dissolved. When it is revealed, it perishes. It is powerful because we have not recognized it. So his first step in this idea of the black iron prison and escaping it is to recognize it and to be there. Now, a lot of people have mentioned the quote from Philip K. Dick, "The empire never ended." And that idea comes out of this Gnostic experience he had in March of 1974. He saw the Roman Empire coexisting with the modern world. It was an overlay. It was a vision of being within the Roman Palestinian world and the modern world at the very same time. And he would switch between them, between Rome around 100 AD and modern California, 1970s, 1980s California. And this happened to him numerous times. And he explored it often and deeply as to what was going on with this switching. And that was his idea of the empire never ending. And it comes back into his idea of the time flow, where in his mind, he had this idea that time had actually stopped at 100 AD and then looped around again. So it looked like it continued on, but it didn't actually. And it looked like it was continuing to proceed, but it wasn't actually. It was still the empire, it was still there. And that there was this immortal overlay of the ancient world on his modern world. The palm tree garden is another image that we get, and that comes out of the idea of the black iron prison. The palm tree garden is probably his idea of the best version of the black iron prison that we can have. It's an area of erudition, and he had a vision of this when he was staring at the Y in the Greek word ichthyos, which means fish, which he was fascinated with because of his experience in 1974. And so those ideas have all started to enter into modern Gnosticism as he's been exploring them through his exegesis. He also makes use of a couple of terms that are very interesting, one of which, amnesis, is very familiar to us, which is the idea of recalling the answers rather than learning them. So it's a remembrance. And Dick didn't feel that he was actually learning anything of this stuff. He wasn't finding it out. It was being remembered because he had lived it before, because he had a past life, because he was being possessed by somebody. There were a lot of reasons why things were being remembered, but they were being remembered and not taught, not learned. Another word that he uses a lot, and this one didn't catch on as much because it's a little harder to say, macro meta soma cosmos, which to him, macro meta soma cosmos, the ultimate genuine structure of reality, a cognate of the Platonic world of ideas. So this is his concept of what life really is, what reality really is at its basic level. So, looking at all these terms, how did Dick deal with them? How did he deal with his Gnostic experience? I don't know how many of the people who are here have had one, but they tend to be very disruptive. They tend to be something that's very shocking to knock us off our game. And that definitely happened with Philip K. Dick. He was not somebody who was deeply religious before the experience and became deeply religious afterwards. He was interested in religion, but he wasn't religious. He was interested in spirituality, but he wasn't spiritual himself. And after the event of March 1974, he became very much so, to the point of driving some of his friends to distraction with all of his discussions of it. And in the exegesis, you can read about it. You can read about his correspondence with many of his friends and him trying to explain to them what had happened to him and trying to make sense of it over and over and over again. And he tried to make sense of it through his books. He wrote the Valis trilogy, which is a very complicated set of books. In 1978, he wrote the novel Valis, and Valis stands for Vast Active Living Intelligence System. And trying to summarize a Philip K. Dick book could take me the rest of the time, and I'm going to try to go fast. In Valis, the main character's name is Horse Lover Fat, and Horse Lover Fat is a complete analog of Philip K. Dick, because Philip means lover of horses and Dick is a kind of fat. So Horse Lover Fat has a vision of a pink beam of light that exposes facts about the hidden reality of the universe. Fat and his friends form something called the Ripidon Society, and Ripidon is a Greek word meaning fin, so I think it ties back into the fish. And they watch a film called Valis about the fall of a president who's an analog to President Nixon. And then they go to see a musician whose name is Eric Lampton, whose daughter Sophia is an incarnation of Holy Wisdom. And Sophia tells them about the Valis entity, which is a satellite that caused the fall of Richard Nixon and this other president in the movie. And then she tells them that they're right. I mean, Sophia, who's 2, tells them that they're right about the satellite and their understanding of reality. And then she gets killed in an accident. And Fat goes on to search for the next incarnation of Sophia. And that's a brief synopsis of that novel. I don't even know where to go with that. I mean, he's documenting what happened to him in a fictionalized way to try and understand what happened to him. He's layering his experiences and his life in fiction multiple times, because while you're reading the novel Valis, you're learning about the film Valis, which is a different plot. And there's another novel named Radio Free Alabama, which apparently was written before Valis and has the plot of the movie in the book. Second book in the trilogy is called The Divine Invasion. And after the fall of Masada in AD 74, God, under the name of Yah, is exiled from Earth and takes refuge in a system called CY30, CY30b. Belial rules Earth. Belial, demon, goat head. Herb Archer is in a car accident on Earth, and he is in cryogenic suspension and relives the past 6 years. 6 years ago, he was a recluse on CY30, CY30b. And the god Yah appears to him as a burning flame. And he marries a woman who's pregnant with Yah's child, Emmanuel. And they meet a fellow named Elias Tate, who is actually the immortal Elijah, who then helps Herb and Ribus return to Earth. And then Emmanuel is supposed to be born and oppose Belial. But Emmanuel is born a little bit premature. There's a big noodle on Earth, and it's the AI system of the Christian Islamic Church. And that AI system, Big Noodle, causes a car accident, which leaves Herb injured and in cryo, which is where we started, and Emmanuel with brain damage, and his mother, Ribus, dead. And so after they get out of cryo and start doing the rehabilitation, they take Emmanuel to a special school where he meets Xena, and Xena teaches him how to regain his memory. And he shows her a parallel universe where Belial is trapped as a goat. And the two kids go in there and they're having a great time. And then they free the goat. And then there's a big battle with another character. And then the person kills Belial. But they set off this chain of events where everybody has to have a fight between accepting Christ and accepting Belial. And whether it's Christ or Emmanuel or Belial is not really clear. But that's the second book in this trilogy. The third book is called The Transmigration of Timothy Archer. And this comes out of an experience that Dick was having after his March 1974 idea. The plot of the book is that there's an Episcopal bishop named Timothy Archer, and he has a daughter named Angel Archer who is married to Jeff Archer, which is Timothy's son. So his daughter, it's not his daughter, it's his daughter-in-law, Angel Archer. And all of this story is told through Angel Archer's perspective. And that is in reaction to a letter that Ursula K. Le Guin wrote about how none of his female characters had any depth whatsoever. So usually when Philip K. Dick writes a novel, it's either from the third person narrative or it's from multiple perspectives. This is one of the few novels, if not the only novel he wrote, where he has a singular narrator, and it's this Angel Archer. She introduces a woman named Kristen Lundberg to Timothy Archer, the Episcopal bishop, and they have an affair. Jeff, her husband, is obsessed with Kirsten and commits suicide. Later, Timothy and Kirsten and Angel have a seance where Jeff shows up. And he tells Kirsten and Timothy Archer that they're going to die. Kirsten gets cancer and commits suicide. Timothy Archer goes to Israel to research psychotropic mushrooms and the resurrection to see if they were associated somehow. But his car stalls in the middle of the Israeli desert and he dies. Angel reunites with Bill, who is Kirsten's son, who has schizophrenia, and he claims that he is the reincarnated spirit of Timothy Archer. And that spirit is within him and is acting through him. He gets institutionalized, and Angel agrees to care for Bill in exchange for a certain record, given to her by a character who is supposedly Alan Watts. So, this story in particular comes out of an experience that Philip K. Dick had. There was an Episcopal bishop by the name of James Albert Pike who did these things. He had an affair, he got kicked out of the church, he went to Israel to figure out if the mushrooms were part of the resurrection, and his car broke down in the middle of the desert and he died, but his daughter-in-law survived. Dick believed that he had been possessed by the spirit of this Episcopal bishop, and he writes about it in the exegesis, about how his life has changed, how all of a sudden he quit doing the things that he used to like to do. He used to like a lot of pot, he used to like a lot of amphetamines, now he likes scotch, and he likes beer. He used to not be able to manage his finances, and all of a sudden he starts becoming a financial whiz and making these different choices, and he goes into this at length as an actual experience that he had. And he wrote about it in this novel. So when you read this novel, you're reading his fictionalization of experiences that he actually had. Crazy experiences, but experiences nonetheless. So last but not least, let me find my notes here. Why is this important to the AJC and to Gnosticism? This is a very good question, because on the face of it, it seems crazy and kind of off the wall. It's definitely a bunch of stuff from science fiction and from 1960s and 70s drug culture and just possible mental illness, any number of things going on with Philip K. Dick. So why are we exploring this, and why does he have such an influence and fascination for the people who get interested in Gnosticism? Part of it is something that I keep coming back to, and it's a theme that I've noticed a lot, and I keep trying to explain to people, and it's really hard to explain. He focuses on the question, not the answer. He's always asking the question, what's real? What happened to me? What was this experience about? Why does it have this meaning for me? Why do I keep coming back to it? Why does it fascinate me? And he keeps coming back to that. He keeps finding answers. He keeps going through answers. He does research. He does reading. He finds out what other people say. And he has all these answers, but he never settles on one. The exegesis is his continual re-examinations of the questions that kept occurring to him. His answers are proposed, they're explored, they're speculated upon, but they're never final. He savored the questions, as Reverend Rick said. He kept coming back to them over and over and over again. For a church like the Apostolic Johannite Church, one of the things that's important about Dick's Gnosticism is it is completely and utterly non-systematized. There is nothing coherent about the ideas in Philip K. Dick's Gnosticism. This is a very modern jumble, a beat poem of cut up ideas that are smashed together almost randomly. He pulls from varied sources. He pulls from Hinduism, from Christianity, from New Age thought, from Greek philosophy, from modern drug ideas, from Hegel, from German philosophers, from Burma. He just pulls in ideas without regard for their source. And he combines them in unlikely ways to try to answer these perennial questions. His system, such as it is so entirely open that the meaning falls out of it. There's no way to get an orthodoxy out of what he's talking about. He just continually plays with the ideas over and over and over and over again. And in the process of doing it, opens them up and opens himself up to layers of meaning that are just not obvious, common, sensical, rational. He gets into ideas that are just crazy. And it walks that sort of borderline between enlightenment and mental illness. It walks that borderline very, very well. His exegesis is a conversation. This book itself, you definitely need to at least dip your toe into, because it's a conversation with himself. And it's a conversation that he's having with himself and the things he knows, the things he's read, with his friends, with reality, with sources, with philosophy. And I want to read you another excerpt from it that talks about that very idea. On page 339, he talks about his writing. And he says, "My writing is salvific in terms of this one road, one dharma of several, the dharma of knowledge. An epistemological path, not a moral path, is put forth. Not the world is evil, but the world is irreal. This is Gnostic, not pious. But the act, the crucial act of balking for me, was moral. It develops out of an awareness of the counterfeit, vis-a-vis, it is wrong ethically to collude with the deceitful and fake. No assertion is made, though, that the world, irreal as it is, cannot inflict punishment for balking." So when he's having this conversation, he's explicitly finding a Gnostic path, a path of knowledge that is salvific. That's what he's talking about in this conversation with himself, with the world, with reality. And he's talking to the world that is irreal, that overlay that we talk about all the time, the black iron prison, the fact that what we perceive is not what is, and that our perceptions are skewed and can be skewed simply by existing and by interacting with the illusion. Another important part of this work and body of work that Philip K. Dick has put forth is that it is a truly Gnostic form of worship, of spirituality. It is art. It's not the best art. His plots are tenuous. His characters are shallow. He's rightly criticized that some of his female characters are simply plot points. And so he's not the world's best artist. He's never going to be on the level of people like Milton, say, or Shakespeare. He's not going to be renowned for the quality and craftsmanship of his work. But the literature in this case allows us to connect and explore these Gnostic ideas freeform. It breaks them out of the Greek Nag Hammadi context that we talk about. It breaks them out of the ancient world, and it breaks them out of the high ivory towerness that sometimes comes with the Gnostic ideas, and it brings them to the common person and says, this is what we're talking about. And it speaks in the language of modernity. It talks about science fiction. It talks about personality and reality and all of these things, psychology and drug use and all of this stuff that we experience in the everyday. And it takes the high weirdness of Gnosticism and brings it into the common weirdness of the everyday. And I think that art, that active imagination that they're talking about, that Stuart Douglas was talking about, that Jung was talking about, is on display in Philip K. Dick. It's not a guidebook. It's not an example of how, it's an example of what was done. It's not an example of how to do it. It's the snapshot of somebody actually doing it. Somebody exploring Gnostic ideas and experiences and thoughts in time, in his works, in his art. And you can see it just kind of spread out all over there. And like I say, it's non-systematized. So it's just all there. And you can pick pieces and you can pull pieces and you can watch his growth in the exegesis, in his novels. You can watch his development. And that in itself is important because there aren't a lot of roadmaps as to how to be a Gnostic in a modern world. There aren't a lot of examples. And this is a very interesting one. So I see your comment here, Joe, and I'm at the end, so I'm gonna finish up and then I'll take questions. So in the exegesis on page 208, he talks about an experience he's having where a voice is talking to him, and he believes it is the voice, I believe, of the immortal Thomas, the apostle. So it's the immortal Thomas, not just Thomas the apostle who existed in Palestine, but it's the immortal version of which is interacting with him in his spiritual life. And the immortal Thomas asks him, "What do you want out of life?" And he responds, "I could ask and answer this." And that's my prepared remarks. So I'm more than willing to take questions at the moment. How do I do that now.
Just
Joe asked if he could make a comment.
Just give me 2 seconds here. Oh, Nora, stop. My dog is crazy.
Hi, Joe.
I just wanted to, hey, I just wanted to say a quick thanks for doing that. And I really enjoyed that. I mean, I certainly enjoy the movies that have been made out of this story. And so it's nice to hear more about the man himself, which admittedly I'm pretty sketchy on. And I just wanted to say before I mute my dog from biting me and barking, I just wanted to say to Jason Memel that I'm never making him a saint. In this church, it'll have to be the person after me. And for that, I'll turn it over.
I'll do it. Vote for me.
I'll turn it over to Joe.
Hello, are you able to hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, great. Something that really resonated me with this idea was this idea of something being non-systematized. When I first came to the church, and for some time after, I felt very overwhelmed by just the glut of different traditions and different information and all. And it resonated with me. I knew I was on the right path, but I could not explain it. I mean, it's so funny. We talk about the ineffable church, and I couldn't F my explanation either. You know, I come from a tradition where the quote from the book of Peter is thrown about quite readily, which is, you know, be ready in season and out of season to give reason for the belief that's in you, faith that's in you, etc. And so there's sort of this expectation of a certain minimum level of apologetics. And I was very much not able to do that. I feel like now, if required to do that, I could do a much better job, in part because I've come to the realization that some of what I feel, believe, etc., does not have to be defended, or it's sort of a red herring. Maybe the person is arguing in bad faith, for example. But all that to say, the non-systematization or non-systemization of it can be kind of a stumbling block, especially if you're trying to explain it to others, or defend it from someone like me who lives in the South and is, you know, attacked by, you know, a Christian apologist, or I feel attacked, where it's like, you know, stand and deliver, you know, defend yourself, defend your beliefs right now at the drop of a hat. And of course that's difficult, but at the same time, I feel like that whole systematic approach is one that is more like geometry. I describe Calvinism, for example, as treating the Bible like a geometric proof, and that, you know, once you have reached your proper exegesis, QED, this is how it is. It doesn't matter if God makes people just to send them to hell and that offends you. You know, this is the geometric proof. I mean, you might as well be saying two parallel lines never intersect. Get over it. So that to me is excessive the other way. And so rather than mathematical, this non-systematized way is more artistic. And of course, art, right. Bishop Mansfield and others mention the value of art. And of course, I mean, Philip K. Dick is an artist. I mean, he's an author, so it is art. Yes. And I feel like that understanding my religion in communion with an art approach, the idea that art is our discussion with the divine or with the things that matter, helped me to bridge that gap. So while I can't explain my religion like a math problem, that's fine, because my religion's not math. You know, it's like, what is the absolute value of the Mona Lisa? It's like the question itself is absurd.
Exactly.
So I appreciate what you said about Philip K. Dick in this regard, that You know, you even made the point. It's not necessarily good art, but that's not the point.
It's not the point.
It's not
the point. Isn't that it be good?
Yeah, it is his dialogue with what happened to him, his experience. And in that regard, he is way more Gnostic than I realized. Like, I knew that there were Gnostic things. He wrote Gnostic, you know, drawing upon Gnostic ideas is not unique. I mean, look at the Wachowski brothers, right? I mean,
right, exactly.
But that doesn't mean they're practicing Gnostics who are trying to make sense of their own experience with the divine. But it seems like Philip K. Dick was exactly that. And so he, as a person, had a lot more in common with me than other authors whose writings may be a little more tidy and a little more properly Gnostic or whatever.
Right.
Because I connect to him as a person better. That's all I wanted to say.
It's such a huge thing to understand that the process of making art is never straightforward, and it's never finished. You know, this conversation with the divine that we have through art doesn't stop just because we put a piece of art down. One of the things that I did over the past weekend is I went to an exhibit of Salvador Dali's work. And I didn't realize that Salvador Dali had done copper prints. So there's all these copper prints that he did. So he did a copper plate and then did a print on ink. And then if he liked the print, he would sign it. And so he has reproductions of these. There's like 160 of one version of it. And he signed them and he colored them, or he said, I want them colored this way. And so he has this art that was not, like his paintings or whatever. It was a mass-produced process that he did. And he learned something from that. I mean, he learned from making the copper plate, and he learned from the colors, and he learned from the inking, and he learned from this and that and the other thing. And they were all different. Every piece was different in just slight ways. But not all of them were good. And some of them were discarded. And I think that happens in art. And it's something that you need to be willing to do and explore. There are several in the exegesis itself. You can watch Dick's process. And he talks about several novels that he never wrote. He had them all plotted out. He had the details and the characters and all of this stuff done. And he never wrote them because whatever he was trying to explore was explored just in the process of thinking about it and getting it down. Now, he may have recycled some of those ideas, but
I have to say to that makes me think so much of the process of a ritual. If let's say that you want to invoke Saturn or something. Okay, well, the whole process of saying, well, what hour is the hour of Saturn this Saturday? I've got to get some lead and, all of these things that correspond to Saturn. By the time you actually go through the ritual, you've done it. You've already put that energy out there. You've already been in dialogue with Saturnian energy for however many weeks it takes you to set this up. And not to be too graphic, but it's almost like sex. The ritual may be the orgasm, but that's not the point. If you're just trying to get off, you're doing sex wrong. There's more to it than that.
And this to me ties back into Philip K. Dick's idea of time, where his time doesn't necessarily just go forward. When you're doing a ritual, the ripples of that ritual extend backwards and forwards. And what you're talking about, the preparation time, are those backward ripples of the ritual itself. And when he's talking about his orthogonal time, where it's at right angles, or he's talking about the retro flow, that is an effect that comes backwards from doing a ritual, because you have to plan for it. Now, I mean, obviously we're causing the ritual to happen by doing all this stuff, but being able to find all this stuff is kind of a backwards effect of the ritual itself. William Branch, I see you got your hand up.
Oh, yes. I actually have the book here. You got me interested in maybe reading another 10 pages. There's 900 or so altogether. So I don't know that I'll ever get through all of it, but at least even one page is really interesting. You can open up a random page in there and just have fun with it.
Yeah. It's a good book for bibliomancy. If you're trying to figure out how to plan your day, just flip open to a random page and read what's on there. And it'll be a sight more interesting than the Bible, I think.
That would be fun with Memphis Mizraim with the scrying work that we're doing. Instead of using the King James Bible, that might be interesting to. But we'd have to have
definitely give that a shot.
Yeah.
I was just going to add that because people had invoked ritual, pun intended, there's a quote of which I'm fond from Ross Nichols that says, ritual is poetry in the world of action.
Yep.
And I mean, it's almost tattoo worthy, but to tie that into, well, even ritual as art, as expression, as, you know, there's lots of overlap and we need more of it.
Yep. We need more music. We need more paintings. We need more literature, poetry. We need more of it. Exactly. Thank you, Tony. We need more mandalas. We need more explorations. And the thing that I really, if you guys take nothing away from my talk other than this, please take this. Make art part of your practice. Anything, dance, ritual, drawing, poetry, writing your thoughts and exploring them in as much detail as you possibly can, but do some kind of art to make this experience come alive and to make a sort of record of where you were at the time. I've gone back over my ritual journals for the past 14 years now. And what I started off this talk with ties into that, because I am not that person anymore. I am not the person who was doing those rituals. And yet I know that person. I know that person intimately, but it's not me. And what implication does that have for my my identity, my being, my soul? Boom, you know, my own mind explodes on thinking about some of that. I'm sorry, Will, you've got the book. Did you have anything else to say?
No, maybe too much. The thing that came to mind was kind of just what you're just talking about just now. There seems to be an alchemical thing with artists and poets and even psychologists like Carl Jung, just digging deeply into something of interest, so deeply that they hit something that maybe pay dirt or that kind of maybe messes them up for a little while, and then they're forced the rest of their life to explore that and work with it. And in Philip K. Dick's case, it sounds like it really messed him up, maybe because he didn't have a spiritual director or someone to ground him. Jung maybe had a strong mind, was able to pull himself through it and make something very useful for the rest of us. But in everyone's case, it uses the symbols and, you know, for Philip K. Dick, he's a writer, so, and he has an imagination, so his exegesis reflects that way of looking at things, and he expresses his experience through those writings. And your talk just made me realize that it seems like everyone who seems to be touched by something at some point in their life and it changes them, uses whatever they are, whether they're a Mason or whatever, it's reflected in that. So
exactly.
That's all I wanted to share.
I wanted to mention that I'm going to undermine my own historic, which now I just hold on to for the sake of being a stubborn ass. My thing about PKD and sainthood, and there was something, so I'm going to undermine that just a little bit here. You know, something that Monsignor Scott had mentioned earlier, talking about the writings, all of his writings being an expression of that one experience. And lest we be tempted to dismiss that, and by proxy, what I really mean is dismiss our own experience, we have to remember that the Nag Hammadi scriptures are precisely the exact same thing. They are the product of somebody else's experience. When we come here, we don't merely swap one literalism for another. We're not trying to be the ancient Gnostics, but the fact that they had an experience and they expressed it in myth and symbol rather than doctrine and dogma it itself, we may not have the exact same tools for the exact same experience, but that in itself is a map. They can't give us their tools. They can't tell us what our tools are, but we can correlate the fact that they have their experience and they have the product of their experience. And Philip K. Dick had the exact same thing. So art, art and symbol and all these things that we're talking about is an opportunity to do what one ancient heresiologist in the patristic age said. They write their own gospel. This is how we do it. This is how we write our own gospel. This is how we lay out the meaning, right? Not simply by gnosis is a beginning. What do you do after? How do you express it? Afterwards. And,
okay, let me get to Kajira here. She put up a little note on here, and I'd like her to talk about it a little bit more. How did you encounter an art or a piece of literature that actually introduced you to Gnosticism? Kajira.
Making me talk on here. Okay. Actually, I was randomly talking with Father Bray about the concept of feeling like I had always known that I was born with all of this knowledge, and I felt this deep sadness when I was really young, like a very small child, like all this knowledge was going away, and I was going to have to figure out how to get it back. It was a really weird struggle I remember having as like a little kid and trying to vocalize that to my parents and my therapists and all of that, and I couldn't articulate it. And I was having that conversation with him, and he pointed me to the Hymn of the Pearl.
Right.
And that just made everything click, and like all of the movies I had seen, I watched a lot of dystopian fantasy and like all of that growing up, and I was just like, my brain exploded, and that was how I ended up with the church.
That's awesome. I am so happy to hear that.
Yeah.
John, did you have something to say? I saw your hand was up.
Oh, that was actually me giving claps for.
Oh, that was claps? Okay.
That was claps.
Let me see. Somebody else said something. Oh, yes, Angie, you were talking about the tie back into spiritual direction and the idea of the call to make art being the same kind of thing. Could you expand on that just a little bit?
Sorry, I was grabbing a little supper. No, just the way you described that call to make art, I was like, oh, that feels like the listening that he was describing earlier. Now, in the spiritual direction, you're doing it with another person, but your call to make art made me feel like listening to yourself and having that internal conversation, making space. When you're doing the art, you've essentially said to yourself, I'm giving you time to speak, even if it's not words per se, or if it is words or whatever. I don't know, it just carried that signature, and I thought that was neat.
It rolls into the young and the active imagination in the Red Book as well, which I think somebody mentioned earlier. It's that same type of, listening to yourself. I really like it. These are flowing together quite nicely, and it wasn't intended that way.
Jason, did you say you had a comment?
Yeah. I just wanted to, for one thing, I wanted to say I'll join the book club here. We're waving around the same text. But also, one of the things I really want to underline that I think you referenced was that this Dick's experience was like so colored by the era that he was in and the environment he was in and his own life experience. And I think that's partially what makes it so fascinating, is that it's not just a grappling with the Gnostic experience, but it's grappling with the Gnostic experience when you're surrounded by modernism and and the breaking down of meaning in civil society and like an increased secularization. Like there's such a meaty amount of weight that adds, I think, to the doubt that PKD is always living with. Whereas like somebody was saying, like maybe Jung was made of sterner stuff. I think maybe Jung was maybe just lucky to be in a different time frame where he wasn't like where his entire society wasn't grappling with nearly as much existential dread.
He had a lot narrower of a focus in his stuff because he was just starting out. But at the same time, because he was just starting out, he was in completely uncharted territory. And I mean, when you read Jung's Red Book a bit, you see some of that where he's trying to grapple with it himself. And he talks about vastness, and he talks about these sorts of things in the Seven Sermons to the Dead, the dread and the vastness and the depth and the darkness that can come along with these ideas. So I think his experience was different because of culture, but I don't know that it was any less wide or deep. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, and I don't mean to impugn either of them. I just more like, I think like just to maybe indicate the specificity of where they were coming from.
But he was probably more coherent because he had a more coherent background.
Yeah, yeah, that's a great way to put it. And the reason I'm so focused on the notion of doubt is that I think, like, especially for a lot of folks in a modern context who almost find themselves edging back into a religious experience, that like they feel like doubt might be wrong. Whereas I think like Philip K. Dick gives me space to both like to see someone else experiencing both doubt and gnosis at the same time.
Exactly. I like that idea a lot. Will Linden, you mentioned something about the Valis Priory. Would you mind talking about that a little bit?
Okay, Valis Priory is the local group of the Thelemic order, not to be confused with any of the People's Front of Thelema or the Thelemic People's Front or any of the others. Which we were trying to think of a name for the group, and thought of course, Vast Active Living Initiation System. And it was also linked with the Ecclesia Gnostica Heretica, which has at least not yet canonized Dick, but we'll work on it.
Well, that sounds like just a fascinating group. Wow. I like the Vast Active Living Initiation System too. That sounds like it'll be something very interesting.
There's lots of very interesting folks down there in New York, and I miss it.
Does anybody else have anything they want to share about art or about Dick or?
I just want to say for the recording that I love Dick, and I can't get enough.
Right.
Monsignor Stratford ages ago wrote a blog post contrasting the different images of Gnosticism, one with Carl Jung, one with Jack Chick, like the evangelical pamphlet writer, and Philip K. Dick. And he entitled the blog post, purely for the sake of getting clicks, Young Chicks with Dicks. So as I'm not sure if he's in here or not, that bears mentioning, but that was quite a blog post at the time.
I'll bet. Yep. Horse lover fat would be proud. Indeed he would. So I think that's pretty much about what I have. There may be some other version of me that has a lot more. There may be an alternate universe where this was much better organized and possibly had slides, but not in this one. So,
well, maybe we can remember it for you wholesale.
That would be great.
And that is the short story, which was the inspiration for Total Recall.
Yes, Total Recall. That's a good one.
Good job, Dr. Maz.
2 weeks.
It's also worth noting that Total Recall is another phrase for anamnesis.
That's right.
Yes,
Anamnesis.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, folks, and thank you especially Monsignor Scott. That was excellent. I definitely appreciate Philip K. Dick slightly more who knows, by the end of my tenure in the chair, I might leave instructions for the next person to do something with his iconography, or you can just slip me some bribes.
Well,
Thank you very much for the excellent talk. I should note that there are no activities planned for the evening. There are for the Saturday and the Sunday night. There's a Q&A and a mass specifically. But of course, Tony has maintained a separate chat room for people to connect and hang out. And you guys are free to keep it going there. I will be tending to my crazy dog who's interrupting half the things I do. So that was an excellent talk, Monsignor. I really enjoyed that.
And I'll head over to the chat room in case anybody has any other ideas on this or anything else that they want to talk about. And thank you guys so much for all the time and attention and interaction. It's been great. And I'm glad so many people are liking Philip K. Dick.
And we will reconvene at 9 in the morning Mountain Time tomorrow for Medieval Magic in the Liturgy with Brian Garner. It should be interesting and full of demons. Get you guys then.
Yep.